Shalom, bitches. Mayan is here with audio only, bringing you some more Billy Bob Space Trucker. We're on Chapter 26, so let's begin. Grand Superintendent Melander stood on the bridge of the Greslin Dreadnought Council's Pride. Water was too heavy and too unwieldy for them to fill a ship with it, despite being an aquatic species, but they had massive pools spread throughout the ship for downtime and getting out of their exosuits. For this reason, they'd always built strong ships, and since they were the Council's main police force, it made sense that they'd have the bulk of the main fleet. The Crushicans were bogged down on their home systems since they shared it with the Libertonians, and their ongoing invasion of Bastion, so the invasion into human space fell to his kind. The humans had just sent a large force into the Libertonian territory, and from what they could tell, that meant most of their fleet was on the offensive, or rather a forward defense of someone else's territory. They'd soon learn the error of sparking a war with the Council. The fleet was on the edge of human space. The FTL lanes ran through a brutal system they called Gemini, some sort of two-headed creature from their lore. The system itself had two stars spinning around one another, and he had no idea how they'd colonized a planet tossed between such extreme seasons. But they had no plans for a land invasion. They'd brush aside orbital defenses, bomb the planet for a while, and move on to actual human colonies with land the Council could use. They were just one system out from Gemini, in a dead system called TR-231. There were some dead planets and an asteroid belt, but the mineral resources were minimal enough to make mining operations not cost-effective. The fleet was approaching the asteroid belt when suddenly the FTL lane flickered and stopped. The ships groaned a bit, slowing down as the lanes vanished around them. Melander looked around at his crew. "Report." We're seeing total FTL gate failure across this sector, sir." "Impossible! There weren't any humans behind us. They couldn't have destroyed the gates." Readings indicate the gates are intact. They just stopped." "That's not possible. Only the Council can control the gates. Fleet status." "All ships reporting in. No damage, sir. Should we take defensive positions?" "Any civilian traffic?" "No. Since the declaration of war, the space lanes into human space have been completely empty." "We're in a dead system. The humans aren't supposed to have much of the fleet left. They're just trying to slow us down. Send out maintenance crews to the nearest gates. Get them operational again." "What about an ambush, sir?" "What did I just say? They don't have more ships. Get them out there. I don't even know how long it would take to reach human space without those gates." The average ship could travel at 10,000 miles per hour. Fast, but nowhere near FTL fast.
"There are minor readings in the asteroids, sir." "Minor? How minor?" "Maybe some small shelters, sir. No engines detected." "Bah, ignore it. Just some old survey stations before they realized the system wasn't interesting, most likely."
What they didn't know was that they were being watched from those asteroids. Rear Admiral Wayne was leaning over the shoulder of one of his techs to read the console. They were running dark at the moment, his defense station hidden among the rocks. "They're just sitting there." "Yes, sir. Looks like they're sending out a maintenance team to one of the gates." "Fat lot of good that'll do them. No defense screen, nothing. Just travel formation." "Yes, sir. We have a clean shot at the forward dreadnoughts. The flagship is currently screened by another dreadnought." "All right, blow that one up. Then get the flagship. That's our primary objective." "Yes, sir." The Lucifer's Hammer was the latest American military station, built in secret and towed to the asteroid field. It housed no less than 8 nuclear reactors, all of which went to powering the main gun. They hadn't figured out how to make a Death Star yet, but this wasn't bad. It could fire a chunk of special alloy 20 feet in diameter at 10,000 miles a second. That was about 5% the speed of light, which was more impressive than it sounded. especially when you see that it's 10,000 miles every single second. It was the largest, most powerful gun America had ever made, and they were already trying to make something bigger and more powerful. Since the greater galaxy had the ability to move ships around through FTL gates for centuries, they had fought around important junctions while seeking to protect infrastructure and colonies. They had no desire to develop any such weapon. If they missed a shot, the possible collateral damage was beyond compare. But humans, and especially Americans, fought on their own rules. With their ability to sabotage the gates, and their ability to live out in empty stretches of space, they had the perfect opportunity. Back on the flagship, General Principal Melander was grumbling and cursing as he paced back and forth on the bridge. The ships were reporting in and were holding position. The dreadnought Thyron's Fury, just ahead of them, was holding position. The principal in charge was a veteran, and the ship itself was top of the line, though not as good as the flagship. It had armor 3 feet thick at its strongest, a crew complement of 15,000 including soldiers, some of the strongest guns in the galaxy, and had been tested in battle 23 times.
Sir, I'm detecting a sudden energy buildup in the asteroids. Is it an engine?
I don't know.
I'm not detecting an engine signature, but I'm seeing an energy spike on par with our entire flagship and 2 other dreadnoughts.
Something in the field blinked, and suddenly the Thyron's Fury was splitting apart.
What happened?
The Grand Principal exclaimed.
What just happened?
Their reactor is going critical, sir.
They watched in horror as the dreadnought began to rupture and split, chunks of it exploding as the ship died. The oxygen was vented out immediately, and since they hadn't been at battle stations, none of the bulkheads had been in place before they were hit. The pieces of metal began to drift away from the center where the reactor had exploded, smaller systems rupturing as energy cells went critical, bodies floating in space, the water from their relaxation pools freezing and splintering in the vacuum.
Sir? Hard evasive maneuvers. Start firing into the asteroid field.
We don't have a lock on any coordinates, sir.
Just open fire. Any rock. All of them. Start shooting back.
The ship started to spin their engines back up, moving in a hurry now. Look at that. Isn't it cute? They're trying to take evasive maneuvers, Rear Admiral Wayne said as he watched the enemy fleet finally start to move. They had to wait for the gun to charge back up before they could fire again, but there wasn't a chance in hell that dreadnought could avoid a bullet moving at 10,000 miles per second. The fire from the fleet began to slam into the asteroids. It was mostly energy bolts and a few missiles, plus much larger versions of what they called matter slammers. The rocks before them started to shudder and split under the fire, but they weren't focused. They were just cracking open the first layer of rocks they could aim at. The humans were beyond that, waiting at the right moment. A few squadrons of fighter bombers were holding back until they had the signal to attack. Wayne knew they were severely outnumbered, even if the platform could wipe out their dreadnoughts in a single shot. Once the Xenos figured out their location, it was only a matter of time before they'd be destroyed. But the point wasn't to survive. It was to kick them in the nuts as hard as possible. He didn't really have time to give everyone a big speech, especially since the battle had already started. So instead, he just gave everyone the green. Railguns began to spit superheated metal at the Xenos. The fighter bombers started to pour out of the rocks and swarm over the closest capital ships. Special Space Marine boarding crafts launched from the rocks, slamming into the smaller Xeno ships. The battle had truly begun, as the Xenos tried to get into a better formation, while the humans shot at them from defensive positions on the rocks. The Lucifer's hammer might be destroyed soon, but they hadn't found their position yet, so they took aim as the capacitors were finally ready. Wayne opened a channel to all the humans in the area. "Well, I'm about to blow up their nicest ship, boys. When we get to Hell, you have direct orders to start taking over. We've already stolen the Devil's Hammer. We might as well start taking his land, too. He grinned as he looked out at the Xeno fleet. Their flagship was dead to rights. The Council's largest, most powerful ship. They'd bragged it could take a broadside from any dreadnought ever made and shrug it off. Well, that might be true. But the humans hadn't made a dreadnought. Oh, and while you sorry shits are taking over hell, start making a statue dedicated to the fine American who started a war with the rest of the galaxy. He pushed the button to fire as he said, "This one's for you, Billy Bob Space Trucker."
365 degrees. Burning down the house.
Billy Bob was drumming as hard as he could on the invisible drums in front of him as Emily shook her head. Why is he burning the house down again? Is it diseased or something? And they couldn't just clean it?
Emily, you should know this by now. Most human music is not literal. It's full of metaphors and analogies and bullshit. We're generally just singing about fucking or getting fucked. And then some sports songs and war songs for good measure. Although one could argue that the war songs fall under getting fucked up.
What about those blues songs?
Well, generally, they're about fucking, or being sad that they haven't fucked in a while, or not fucking the specific person. Occasionally they're sad about other things. I mean, I was just using some generalizations. But there are a lot of songs about metaphors focused on the themes I mentioned. There are, of course, literal songs, but they aren't very common. Although there's a good song about changing the name of a city.
Once Billy Bob had laid claim to the Rosie again, and gotten the Archangels off of it, the USS Predator had gone into attack mode. They attacked and destroyed a Crucian ship, making a show of bombarding a tracking station on the planet, and then skipped off as the Council species tried to figure out what happened. Getting Archangels onto a planet wasn't hard. Getting them off was the trouble. So instead of taking the fight to the surface, they began to raid shipyards and orbital platforms. They all knew this wasn't going to be a quick war, so delaying production of new ships for a few months was more than worth it. Since the Archangels were doing their best to ruin the Xeno infrastructure, the news had forgotten about Billy Bob and Emily. He had no doubt the crabs were still looking for them, but they probably thought they were on the cruiser that had been running amok. So Billy Bob had the Rosie docked at a black market space goblin station, and they'd rented out a room for a galactic week while they waited for the CIA to show up. He'd make sure to crank up the gravity in the Rosie twice a day and play around with Stomper, so his muscles didn't atrophy or anything like that. Plus, he had fun playing around with the Space Fox horse. It hadn't grown much since they got it, but he was still excited for the day he could ride it into battle. Although, against what, he had no idea. So they'd spent 3 days so far hanging out in the room listening to music, or going to one of the station's restaurants, or just wandering around for the hell of it. He'd quickly become popular as a chef, teaching them how to properly cook human food for maximum enjoyment. Their supplies were limited now that the war had cut off the supply, or at least made it harder to get. Yet human food went a long way for most Xenos. Humans were incredibly dense after all, so what would be a tiny portion to a human was a feast for a Xeno. The few omnivores and carnivores that were civilized paid very well to get the incredible treats humans enjoyed. Billy Bob had been learning more about Xenos in the last few days, without constantly driving around and knowing he needed to recover from getting the shit kicked out of him. He had nothing much else to do. For example, he learned the space goblins had been scavengers on their home planet, and had just started to explore the greater galaxy when the regulation war was in full force. As such, they were the only non-council species allowed to trade in uninhabited sectors that were within council space. It had been a quick fix to allow them to start trading while the fate of the galactic government was being decided. The council founders had figured they'd join once the war was over, But instead, the goblins had figured if the founder settled political disputes that way, they'd just remain neutral. And too many member species had started setting up trade with them for it to make sense to shut them down. So for the last few hundred years, they'd been living in a gray area of the law, founding stations outside the directly regulated and monitored sectors of the council in order to trade freely. The council wasn't thrilled, but it served a purpose in letting carnivores and omnivores get meat while keeping the hands of the council clean. Aside from the Crucians, of course, but the law was different when you were the secret police. Aside from the Crucians, of course, but the law was different when you were the secret police. Also, he found out there were a ton of different ways species slept when they checked out the room and had to figure out what kind of bed to order. The space goblins, for example, slept in these padded chambers in groups. The Borks would sleep more or less sitting up so their horns didn't gouge anything, but arranged in a circle so they could keep their eyes on everyone. The space ants the goblins used as guards had to sleep in complete darkness, with something covering them, and joined by no less than 2 and no greater than 4 other space ants. Apparently, humans had incredibly simple sleeping needs compared to most of the galaxy. Same with the Libertonians. He did discover that their beds weren't flat like humans, but they had sort of padded bowls, so when they slept in it, their wings could fit better and extend around their shoulders like a cloak. He'd been trying to keep a mental list of eagle things and raptor things when dealing with her. The appearance he just considered a tie. The pointed beak was more like a dinosaur, some of the talons and claw stuff, but wings and mostly feathers. Bird. The sleeping thing was totally a nest, so bird. But she shredded and ate meat like, well, eagles also ate meat, so it was confusing. She finally took off the survival suit on the second day to get it mended and cleaned, which was when he discovered what her downy coloring was besides her white hair. Feathers, head feathers, shit. Billy Bob was struggling to figure out the terms in his head still. Either way, her head was white, and that ran down to around her shoulders before it turned black, and then had blood red just along her forearms. She'd changed into what he could only describe as a loose gray vest with 70s bell-bottoms with Birkenstocks. She'd explained that their claws cut up many surfaces, so they wore special shoes to prevent that. At least she didn't wear socks. He would never have forgiven her. Although the older he got, the more comfy socks and Birkenstocks sounded. With the bell-bottoms, he didn't see what the coloring on her legs was like. He'd been avoiding any discussion about her anatomy like the plague, however, since he had no idea how to approach it. Her chest was sort of arranged like he figured fit for a female, but she had a tuft of feathers around where he expected cleavage to start, so what was beneath the vest was still a mystery. Was she even a mammal? She wasn't cold-blooded, he knew. Without the cloak of the suit to hide under, he had also discovered she had a small tail. Fin? Was it called a tail on a bird? Raptor. Fuck it, he was confused. When she'd caught him looking, she'd mentioned that it was for stabilization, and he'd quickly changed the subject. He knew that she liked him. Aside from trying to cut his throat that one time, she did like to rest against him when they listened to music. That, and he caught her staring at him when she was awake during his own sleep cycle. He did like her bright purplish-pink eyes, though. That was cool. She'd sometimes lean against him when they were waiting for food. She'd even go so far as to rub her cheek to his in public, but she mentioned it was strange for her to have to bend down to do so, which made him even more aware of the strange sensation that she was taller than him. Billy Bob just didn't know what to do. He wasn't a diplomat. He'd never really considered paying attention to Xenos in this sort of way, until everyone told him he damn well better. Whenever he did hear something about her species and affection, it always sounded like a surefire way to get torn to shreds for a human. He was much stronger than her, but his skin wasn't exactly protected from being torn to shreds by super sharp space eagle raptor talons. Did he dare even approach the subject? He'd been all but told that his country demanded it of him for the war effort. That was a whole mess of pressure he had never, ever expected to have applied to him. Maybe he should look up more about Libertonians. But what if she looked at his extranet history and saw he was looking up Libertonians doing it? If it weren't for all the alcohol he'd been drinking, he was confident he'd be super stressed out. He was trying to explain to her some of the enigma that was the talking heads, when they were both startled by the sound of the room's comm screen beeping at them. He quickly turned the music off and turned it on.
Yes?
He was looking at a rather attractive woman with blonde hair and emerald eyes in some sort of sparkling green dress that matched her eyes. She smiled at him, flashing her white teeth. "Colonel Billy Bob?"
Never expected to hear that, but yes. Who are you?
"Who else is looking for you this far into Council space on a black market station, while you shack up with a space bird?"
Eagle Raptor.
The woman looked confused for a second as he shook his head.
Never mind. Right, you're the CIA, of course. Well, what do we do from here? Some sort of secret meeting?
"We're in what can be considered friendly territory. Just meet me down at the bar. I'd like to get a drink with you and talk things over." She smiled again as the feed went dead. He turned and then jerked in surprise as he found Emily literally standing right behind him.
Ugh!
"Who was that?"
You heard the call. That's the girl from the Humans Intelligence outfit.
"Why was she dressed like that?"
It's a dress. Human women wear them to look attractive."
Had he missed something? The trucker was confused. She turned as she moved towards the exit. She had gotten her survival suit and cloak back, but hadn't put them on yet. She was still in that oddly retro outfit. "Let's go speak to her so I can set the record straight."
What?
Billy Bob was lost. If there had been such a thing as a translator to translate female to him, then he'd gladly pay at least one of the 10 billion credits he was going to get for this. He followed after her, grabbing a jacket on his way out so he didn't look quite so redneckish in his usual plaid shirt. But as he went to grab his jacket, he saw Emily's gloves had been dropped to the floor. That meant she was going out with her talons bared. He didn't understand why, so he quickly pulled the jacket on and moved to catch up with her. She was walking very briskly, as she was already down the stairs in the hotel's bar when he found her. Then he saw the human woman with the sparkling bright green dress. She saw him and started to walk forward with a smile, one leg visible up to mid-thigh through the split in her dress. She extended her hand. "Billy Bob?" But before he could approach, Emily stepped between them. He was even more confused than earlier when he saw her wings spread out wide, as if she was taking up as much space as possible. Billy Bob couldn't even see the woman past her. But suddenly her white wings shifted, as he saw bright red feathers bared beneath the normal white ones. What was going on? Hello? He couldn't see what was going on, but the woman was looking up at Emily, towering over her, wings flared, talons extended out. The gossamer dragonfly-like wings in between her upper and lower arms shimmered in the light. Emily didn't respond, but just advanced slowly, one step at a time, as the human backed up. When the CIA agent tried to step to the side, Emily snapped at her and quickly stepped to block her. "What's she doing?" she said, as now the whole bar was watching.
"I have no idea,"
Billy Bob called out from the other side. Emily just let out a menacing raptor-like screech and advanced quickly as the woman squealed and backed up. Emily, what are you doing? He said while following behind the Libertonian. Why is she doing this? I have no idea. Stop her. I don't know how. Emily advanced again, and the woman shrieked as she was slapped with those big wings, until she turned and ran out of the bar. Once she had done that, Emily turned to Billy Bob, who saw even more of those bright red feathers bared beneath the white ones now. She flapped her wings at him and backed up a ways. Then she turned, startling the patrons as she dashed forward, stealing a bottle of alcohol from the bar and 2 plates of food from nervous space goblins. She quickly handed them to Billy Bob, basically shoving them in his face, until he grabbed them all, rather awkwardly since he only had 2 hands. Once he had done that, she lowered her wings, standing to Billy Bob's left as he felt one wing on his back and the other his front. She stared back at the confused human woman and called out, "Clearly I'm the better provider. Not to mention my natural bright coloring is much more impressive, even with your cheap color enhancement. He's obviously chosen his mate." Billy Bob nearly dropped everything in his hands then and there. "What?" was all he could gasp out. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob, Space Trucker. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Leave a like and subscribe if you did, and please let other people know about this channel. We recently hit the 100 subscribers mark, and I am wildly excited about that. In other news, I am planning to head to OhioCon this January, and so if anyone else is planning on being there, go ahead and send me a PM. We might be able to schedule a get-together. So, this is my first big anime convention I've ever been to, and one of the big reasons I'm doing these narrations is to practice my voice work for going into the anime industry as a voice actor. That is my ultimate goal with all of this stuff. So, I'm really excited. Hopefully there will be some panels with some voice actors so I can poke at them, figure out how to actually get into all of that kind of stuff. But hey, we'll see what happens. Anyways, on that note, have a nice one, y'alls.